A heavy He had expected the little thing to be curled up by the fireplace, still soaking in the warmth. But when he swung his legs over the bed and walked into the living room, he stopped short. The puppy was gone. Nathan scanned the room quickly. The towel he had wrapped around it lay discarded near the fire. His front door was still firmly shut, and the windows remained locked. So how had it disappeared? Frowning, he grabbed a sweatshirt, pulled it over his head, Instead, Nathan shifted his focus. What about Rusty? At the mention of the puppy's name, Leo's eyes softened. I found him a few weeks ago, he said, scratching behind Rusty's ear. He was all alone, hiding near a dumpster. I think someone left him there. Nathan's jaw clenched at the thought. A puppy, abandoned in the freezing cold. He's been with me ever since, Leo continued, his voice quieter now. We keep each other warm at night. He always knows when someone bad is coming. Nathan watched the way Leo spoke about Rusty, the way his entire demeanor shifted from fear to quiet protectiveness. It was clear. Rusty wasn't just a pet to Leo, he was all he had. The questions left unanswered. the beginning of the end. Nathan sat in his office later that night, his phone pressed to his ear. "We have evidence," he said firmly. "Photos, location, a witness willing to testify. If the DA doesn't move on this, I'll take it to the press myself." Detective Marshall hesitated on the other end. Then, with a quiet sigh, he said, "We'll issue a warrant." Nathan hung up, his body still thrumming with nervous energy. Greg Simmons was going down. Nathan had started this thinking he was just helping a lost boy. But now he was part of a fight much bigger than himself. And there was no turning back. The courthouse buzzed with tension. The air inside was thick, heavy with whispers, camera flashes, and the quiet murmur of journalists scribbling down notes. The world was finally watching Greg Simmons face justice. Nathan Carter adjusted his tie, his mind running through every possible outcome. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, arranging witness testimonies, ensuring Leo Parker wouldn't be forced back into the hands of the man who had tormented him. But he also knew this wouldn't be easy. Greg had money, he had connections, and worst of all, he had a defense team that specialized in making victims look like villains. The prosecution begins. Judge Eleanor Briggs called the courtroom to order. The prosecutor, Emily Graves, stood tall, her sharp gaze fixed on the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, "we are here today to ensure that Greg Simmons answers for his crimes. Crimes against the most vulnerable, children placed in his care who trusted him only to be met fists. They had him now. The final blow. Greg's attorney stood for cross-examination, his smile tight. Leo, wouldn't you say that Mr. Simmons was simply enforcing discipline? Leo stared at him. No. Hayes adjusted his tie. You're sure you're not exaggerating? Maybe you misunderstood his intentions? Nathan's stomach twisted. He could see the old fear creeping back into Leo's eyes, the same fear Greg had planted in him for years. But then Leo took a deep breath. He said if I told anyone, no one would believe me, the boy said. His voice shook, but his words cut like steel. And now? Emily asked softly. Leo's gaze flickered to Nathan, then to the jury. Now, I know that was a lie. The verdict. Sophia Morales' testimony came next. She described the hidden basement, the punishments, the nights spent crying in the dark. Nathan could see it, the way the jury shifted in their seats, their expressions hardening. Then came the final piece. The photographs, the rotting wooden planks, the shackles on the basement wall, the evidence no one could deny. Greg Simmons sat still as stone as the jury deliberated. And when they returned, the foreman's voice was clear and unwavering. On the charge of child endangerment, guilty. On the charge of felony child abuse, guilty. On the charge of unlawful imprisonment, guilty. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Judge Briggs adjusted her glasses before delivering the final blow. Gregory Simmons, this court sentences you to 30 years in federal prison. Nathan exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Leo sat frozen beside him. Then, slowly, his small hands curled into fists. Not in fear this time, but in victory. He had won. A new beginning. But where? Outside the courthouse, Nathan knelt in front of Leo. You did it, kid. Leo bit his lip, looking down. But what happens now? Nathan hesitated. That was the question, wasn't it? Leo had spent his whole life bouncing between homes that didn't want him. He had escaped Greg's clutches, but now what? Nathan glanced at Rusty, the golden puppy nuzzling against Leo's leg, tail wagging happily. I don't know yet, Nathan admitted. Leo looked up at him, his expression unreadable. But maybe we can figure it out together. For the first time in a long time, Leo smiled. And as Nathan watched him step out of the courthouse and into the sunlight, he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Nathan Carter had always been a man of reason. He lived by logic, by the rules, by keeping his distance. But now, sitting across from Leo Parker in his quiet cabin, he realized something had changed. And there was no going back. The goodbye that never happened. After the trial, the social workers had started making calls. Leo would be placed in another foster home, they said, maybe even a group home, somewhere safe. Nathan listened. He nodded in all the right places. But the moment he hung up the phone, he realized he didn't believe them. Safe? Where had that word ever existed for Leo? Leo had spent years being shuffled from one house to another, from strangers who barely noticed him to homes that only saw him as a paycheck. And Nathan knew, if he let Leo go now, he would lose him forever. An offer he never expected to make. Nathan wasn't sure how to bring it up. How do you ask a kid who's never had a home if he wants to stay? How do you convince a boy who's spent his whole life being let down that this time will be different? So instead of making a speech, he made pancakes. It had become a quiet tradition, ever since the night Leo had laughed, really laughed, for the first time over a ruined batch of batter. As Nathan flipped the golden pancakes onto a plate, he finally spoke. You know, he started, keeping his voice casual. I was thinking, Rusty seems pretty happy here. Leo, sitting at the kitchen table, glanced up. Yeah? Nathan nodded. Yeah, and well, I don't think he'd like it if you left. Leo's fork paused mid-air, his expression unreadable. Nathan set the plate down in front of him. That's why I was thinking, he cleared his throat, if you want to stay, I mean, officially, with me. For the first time since Nathan had known him, Leo looked stunned, not happy, not relieved, just frozen. Leo started, but no words came out. He set his fork down, his hands clenched into small fists. Nathan waited. He had never waited for anything in his life. He had always filled the silence, controlled the conversation. But this wasn't his decision. It was Leo's. After what felt like an eternity, Leo spoke. "You're serious?" Nathan met his eyes. "Yeah, kid, I am." Leo's hands tightened around the edge of the table. His breathing was shallow, his eyes darting, waiting for the catch. "Like forever?" Leo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's throat felt tight. "Yeah," he said. "If you want—" Leo stared at him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he shoved his chair back and ran outside. Fear of hope. Nathan found Leo sitting on the back porch, knees pulled to his chest, Rusty curled beside him. He sat down next to them, silent. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Leo whispered, "People don't keep me." Nathan clenched his jaw. How many times had this kid been abandoned? He didn't know how to promise Leo that he wouldn't be the next one, that he wouldn't wake up one morning and change his mind. But he did know one thing. "You don't have to run anymore," Nathan said softly. Leo's fingers curled into Rusty's fur. "I don't know how to stay." Nathan exhaled, then reached down and ruffled Rusty's ears. "Well," he said, "I guess we'll just have to figure that out together." One paper, one word, one family. Filing the adoption paperwork was the easiest decision Nathan had ever made. Dealing with the state, that was harder. The social workers questioned everything. "Are you sure? Do you have the time? Can you handle a child with trauma?" Nathan had argued in courtrooms for years, but this was the first time he had ever fought for something personal. And he fought hard, because Leo Parker wasn't just a kid who needed saving. He was home. The word that changed everything. Weeks passed. The paperwork was nearly finalized, but Leo still held back. Nathan didn't push. Until one night when Leo shuffled into his office, hovering in the doorway. Nathan looked up. "You good?" Leo hesitated. Then, in a voice so quiet it almost didn't exist, he said it. "Night, Dad." Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Leo's ears turned red, and he immediately started to bolt. But before he could, Nathan reached out, not grabbing, just steadying. He squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Night, kid." And for the first time in his life, Leo didn't flinch. A forever home. Months later, Leo stood in the same courthouse where he had testified against Greg Simmons, but this time, it wasn't for a trial. Judge Eleanor Briggs sat before them, her usual stern expression softened as she signed the final document. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter," she said, handing over the official adoption decree. "It's official." Nathan took the papers, but he barely saw them, because beside him, Leo was grinning. Rusty barked happily, his tail wagging. Nathan looked down at his son, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to belong. Because this wasn't just a legal agreement. It was family, forever. The winter had melted away, and in its place, spring had arrived with quiet grace. Nathan Carter sat on the wooden bench in his backyard, a warm cup of coffee in his hands. The air smelled of fresh grass and blooming wildflowers, the soft hum of bees filling the space around him. And in front of him, Leo and Rusty raced across the open yard, a sight that still felt surreal. The boy who once huddled in fear on Nathan's couch, his shoes always tied tight, was now barefoot, running through the soft earth, laughing. Rusty, his golden fur gleaming in the sun, barked excitedly as he chased after Leo, his tail wagging in pure joy. Nathan let out a slow breath, his chest tightening, not with stress, not with worry, but with something that felt like peace. A new beginning for Leo. There had been a time when Leo didn't laugh, a time when the world had only been cold hands, locked doors, and whispered threats. Nathan had seen it in the boy's eyes when they first met, that quiet, unshakable fear of being unwanted. Now, looking at him rolling in the grass with Rusty, his face flushed from play, Nathan knew Leo had finally begun to heal. The scars were still there, but they no longer defined him. Leo wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. Rusty, the heart of the family. Rusty, the small, trembling puppy who had once scratched at Nathan's door, was no longer a stray. He had grown, his legs stronger, his eyes brighter. But more than that, he had found his purpose, because it wasn't just Leo who had needed saving. Nathan hadn't realized it at first, but Rusty had changed him too. The dog had brought Leo out of the darkness, had given the boy a reason to hold on, to fight, to trust again. And in his own quiet way, Rusty had done the same for Nathan. The lawyer, who once lived alone in a quiet house, had found himself buying dog treats, fixing fences so Rusty wouldn't wander off, and sharing his couch with a dog who took up way too much space. Rusty hadn't just been rescued, he had rescued them. The words that meant everything. Nathan was pulled from his thoughts by the sound of Leo's voice. The boy had stopped running, his hair tousled, his chest rising and falling from exertion. He turned to Nathan, wiping a bit of dirt from his cheek. "Thanks for not giving up on me, Dad." The words were soft, almost uncertain, like he was still testing them out. Nathan felt something in him stumble and fall. He set his coffee down, standing up from the bench, walking over to ruffle Leo's messy hair. "You're stuck with me now, kid," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "No getting rid of me." Leo smiled, a real, full, open smile. And for the first time, Nathan realized, this was everything. A home that was chosen. The sun dipped lower in the sky as the day stretched on, golden light filtering through the leaves. Rusty curled up next to Nathan's chair, his body warm and solid against his feet. Leo sat on the grass, picking at wildflowers, completely at ease. Nathan let himself breathe. For years, he had built his life around winning cases, closing deals, chasing something he could never quite name. But this simple, quiet moment in his backyard, this was what mattered. Lessons from a journey they never expected. Kindness can change a person's fate. Family isn't about blood, it's about who you choose to love. Standing up against evil will always bring justice. Nathan looked at Leo and Rusty, his family, the family he never planned for, but couldn't imagine life without. And as the sun set over their little house, he knew one thing for certain. They had found home.